Now, we could extend this analysis of major institutions or major organizations almost indefinitely. And if you're a conflict theorist, you could argue whatever kind of social institution or organization you're looking at, that the way it works, the way it looks, the way it operates, its rules, its procedures, its policies, were shaped by conflict. And some people got what they wanted, got what they needed, and other people didn't. And that the rules, procedures, operations of those institutions, organizations, ultimately served the interests of some people, but hurt other people. And your analysis would be to explore exactly how and why that happens. Notice you could apply that basic set of arguments to almost any kind of social institution. But let's not beat that horse to death. Let's take a related but somewhat different example. How cities are geographically distributed, organized. Conflict theorists who study cities, urban sociologists have argued, at least conflict theorists who are urban sociologists have argued, that the way cities are laid out, the way they work, the way they operate, is shaped by power and conflict. And ultimately, it reflects the interests of really well-organized, powerful groups of people. Let me just give you one quick example. Suppose a large corporation wants to put up a factory, a store, some kind of commercial operation in a neighborhood. And that neighborhood is made up of poor or working class people. Maybe it's a little run down. Maybe it's an area that has some problems with the housing. But nevertheless, maybe a lot of people that work there or live there actually enjoy the community. And the community may or may not have social problems like lots of crime. In any case, a large corporation, maybe a large construction firm, a large developer, may very well approach city government and ask that that neighborhood be condemned, that they change zoning ordinances and so forth, allowing the contractor to come in, buy the neighborhood, tear down the houses, buy the neighborhood, and the underlying land at basically bargain basement prices, paying pennies on the dollar, or at the very least forcing people out of their homes who don't want to move, even if they are offered a somewhat higher offer. So they go to the government, they make a deal, money changes hands, favors are traded. Much of it may occur underneath the table. Much of it may be, well, underlying corruption. But however it occurs, whatever the mechanics, the end result is that the neighborhood is bulldozed and a big shopping center or a big factory goes in that place. The poor, the working class are displaced, forced into to live into other areas where they don't want to live there. Maybe they have to pay higher rent and so forth. They wind up hurt, while people that have a lot more influence, power, better organization, and so forth, they wind up benefiting, making money, and so forth. That's just one example of ways in which power and underlying conflict can reshape the way that a city works and the way it looks. And according to urban sociologists, a lot of things about how cities operate and the kinds of problems they have are shaped directly and indirectly by differences in power and large-scale social conflict. Let's take a different example. Conflict theorists often argue that social conflict shapes culture. Marx had this idea of ideology. Ideology is attitudes, beliefs, and so forth about the social system. Beliefs about how it works, how it should work. Beliefs about whether we live in a decent country or not. About how we should change our country, what kind of country we want to move towards being. It's beliefs about society, beliefs about right and wrong, beliefs about politics. According to Marx, many of our popular attitudes and beliefs serve the interests of rich, powerful people and actually work against the interests of the mass of people. Even so, lots of people, even poor working class people who are getting screwed over, still buy into those beliefs. They may believe that if they work hard and follow the rules, they'll go to heaven when they die. They may believe that America really is a great country. They may believe that if they work hard, they too can become rich. They may believe that America really is the land of opportunity. They may believe in the American dream. The list goes on. If Marx is right, well then, a lot of these beliefs and attitudes are nothing other than justifications for the existing social system. And the more people buy into those justifications or that ideology, the less political resistance there is to the social system. the less social change. The more the rich guys and the fat cats and the power brokers get their way. They get their way by manipulating popular opinion, by getting inside of our head and changing the way we look at the social world. And by doing so, they change the way we act in terms of political action, social movements, political behavior. Ultimately, they get what they want by getting inside of our head and changing the way we look at the social world. Those are all examples of ideology. Now, you don't have to be a radical sociologist like Marx to believe that powerful groups of people often have quite a bit of influence over popular opinions and popular attitudes. After all, a lot of times they are well connected in the media. They have lots of media resources. And a lot of times they have lots of influence on all levels of education and probably can influence attitudes in other ways as well. The larger point is that powerful, well-organized groups of people may very well get their message out and be very effective in manipulating popular beliefs and attitudes in such a way that makes it easier for them to do business, easier for them to get what they want, and ultimately easier for them to screw over everyone else. At the same time, other groups of people who are less powerful, less well-organized, perhaps poorer, perhaps less well-educated and so forth, lower in social status and so forth and so on. Those people usually have much less ability to get their message out or to sell it effectively. Even when they do get their message out, a lot of times it comes out in a distorted fashion that actually winds up working against them. They get painted as villains, as fools, as cartoon characters, or they simply get ignored. One way or the other, their ability to shape popular culture is greatly constrained by their lack of power and so forth. Now, let's take one other example in which power and conflict may shape the social world. In this case, how it may shape interpersonal relations or relations between groups. Quickly, go back to the 1940s and 50s. The American South, and other parts of the country as well. Here I just want to emphasize, just for a minute as an example, Jim Crow laws. The unfair, unequal treatment of African Americans. Racist laws that basically created all sorts of barriers and segregation between blacks and whites. Signs in windows saying that black people couldn't work in a particular area or eat at a certain restaurant or go to a certain bar. Separate sections in movie theaters or buses assigned to blacks. All of these were basically treating blacks as second-class citizens, discriminating actively against them in their everyday lives. Undoubtedly, that helped contribute and perpetuate to ongoing prejudice and other forms of more informal forms of discrimination against blacks by everyday people. But it also shaped interpersonal relations within the black community and between whites and blacks. Let's say, for example, that you are a young white person or a young black person and you happen to meet someone of the opposite sex who was also of a different color. For example, a young white man and a young black woman who happened to hit it off, who happened to be attracted to one another. If race hadn't been an issue, they might have dated. Who knows? They might have gotten married and had kids. But in the world of Jim Crow, that was verboten. It was forbidden. It was something that was literally criminalized in most states. Blacks and whites were not allowed to get married. The marriages were not recognized, and in fact, they could be arrested for even trying to get married. And of course, if they had kids, well, that's a whole different story, and a particularly ugly one as well. They and their family clearly would have faced intense discrimination and, frankly, threats of violence as well. Ultimately, what it meant is who you could have sex with, who you could marry, who you could be friends with, who you could have as a neighbor or a co-worker were shaped by, well, discriminatory policies, statutes, laws, and so forth, which also reflected the underlying power of some whites, particularly racist whites, who were able to control government, control social institutions, and impose racist laws and rules on African Americans and to some degree on whites who were less bigoted themselves. Ultimately, relationships between people, personal relationships between people, were shaped in dramatic ways by underlying power and conflict. in the way that powerful groups of people were able to impose their will on other groups of people who had less power. Now, that pretty much finishes up what I want to talk about today in this video. Next time around, we're going to have our last video on conflict theory, where we're going to look at many of the core assumptions and arguments of conflict theory a little closer. For right now, I guess that's it. We'll see you next time around. Thank you very much.